We are now going to walk through a real attack, and this exercise is geared to let you understand all the information that you've learned in this class. So what you'll see is that everything that we've learned from the beginning of the course till now can be applied to this exercise. The goals of this module is to roll up the understanding that we now have of cybersecurity threat information sharing. And really the idea is that we're going to take a really specific example and you're going to be able to pull out aspects of an attack and you're going to be able to correlate them and you're going to be able to define specific relationships that occurred within this attack. And once you've defined them, you'll be able to visually represent them using sticks, a common language used to share security threat information. Here's a little background. You are an IT administrator. You work for a very large company that handles finances. You have a number of different departments underneath you. Each department is slightly different. Some handle individual personal finances, others very large corporate finances. And what we're going to do now is we're going to get a report from two individuals that are saying they're having problems. Their systems are acting strangely. That's usually how it starts out. The first system that we'll review is Alice's system. The second system is Bob's. And what we want to do is we want to look at these videos that represent specifically what's happening on their systems, and using the information that we learn from these videos, try to determine exactly what type of attack occurred and how it might be mitigated. Now, in doing this, we're going to have to put out specific information that defines exactly what resources are being affected and how they're being affected. And let's walk through this and see how much we've learned in this course. Now, as you walk through the videos, what I want you to do is to use the steps that we've already provided. And in those steps, what we did was we defined specific ways to identify threat actors. We defined what an indicator is. We defined what an incident is. We defined what the exploited target is. We defined what the tactics, techniques, and procedures are, the observables, and of course, most importantly, the course of action to take to correct or mitigate the problem. Now again, as you're going through the video, I want you to look at each one of these aspects of the information, how we can represent it, how we can form relationships with it, and then finally come up with a good solution for how to resolve that issue. Now, I'm not going to ask you to do a formal presentation or anything like that on this information, even though you can actually use some of this information for your final report. Now, I must tell you that because I've already given you all this information, you're probably only going to get like an 80, all right? But if you're stuck and you can't get a good resource and source for information, you can use this background to provide that in your report, provided you do a good job at it and you finish it completely. So we're going to perform an analysis operation. And in doing that, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the original email that was received by a specific group. And then we're actually going to look at two specific systems and see exactly what happened when they received that email and what was the process that they used and what happened to their systems during that process where potentially malicious software was deployed on these systems. Now, as we go through this, we're going to determine what information can be extracted to define that attack. And then finally, you should come up with your own conclusions about what happened during that attack, what type of attack it was, and possibly more information that we need to round out our report. Now, what we'll see is that we're never really going to know who the attacker is. Okay, I just haven't given you that information. But you'll be able to understand exactly how well the attacker knew this environment by going through this procedure and understanding exactly what occurred on those systems. The first indication of the attack occurred in an email. And in this email, what happened was that Beth Blue, who is the assistant to the manager of the group, Doug Douglas, sent out an email. Now, in this email, it identified specific information about operations that were occurring in that group. In other words, the attacker knew this group. He knew what he wanted to do. And inside of the email, he understood that he could get away with passing a malicious file along with the email. Again, this email and the malicious file, therefore, had to pass through all the spam filters. It had to pass through all the malware detection of an email service to get onto Alice's and Bob's system. So what we see here is that this email is received by Alice and by Bob, and of course, it's a email that requires immediate response. You have to do this. Please get this done. And that's exactly what triggers this attack. So once Alice gets this email, what she's going to do then is she's going to download that PDF. Now again, I'm not giving you any of the names so that you can pull those out for your analysis that you're doing. But I'm going to tell you that there is an email that's in there, and there is an attachment with that. And as she pulls down that email, reads it, and then pulls down the attachment, she's going to run it on her system. Now, when she runs it on her system, you're going to see exactly what happens to her systems at that point in time. So let's look at that. So now that we've seen what happened to Alice's system, what we want to do is look at Bob's system. Now, the reason why we're looking at Bob's system is because there is a course of action that's hidden inside there. So we want to look at just what happens in Bob's system and how it varies from Alice's and really understand why there is a variation. So now that we've looked at the two different attacks and we looked at the email message, let's start considering a number of different things. For one thing, how was this attack delivered? What mechanism was used? What TTPs can we identify? Is there a mail subject that maybe we can filter on? Is there a name of a PDF that we might be able to filter on? Maybe get a hash from, right? And at the low level, what type of attack techniques were being used? Now, when we look at the files themselves, do we know anything about the infected file? Do we know anything about the encryption that was being used? Do we know anything about the files that were infected? We have to roll these all up and understand exactly what that means and what the association is. And then finally, there is one specific file that's left on that system that's new to the system. What was that file? Why is that so important? Consider these, and let's consider a couple of other additional aspects. The other aspects that we may want to consider is what processes or process was added to the system. How was it used within the system to do the thing that it was doing? What system resources were being modified in addition to the files that we looked at? Was there anything else within the system that had been modified or added? And then finally, let's try to understand, do we understand who this actor is? Could we specifically say the actor is A, B, or whatever it might be? And then overall, looking at the attack, or how can we classify this attack? If we were to classify it, what is the name of the attack that you would give to it? Consider that. Now that you have considered all the information in your analysis procedure and have a good idea of how you would represent this, I wanted to walk through the flow of the attack just so that you can reconsider things or understand better the things that you've picked out. The first thing is that this attacker had to understand the company. He had to understand the employees that were within that company. How did he do that? Did he use social networking? Again, the stuff that we're talking here isn't going to be answered in this presentation, but it's something to let you think about. Now, what he did, though, was he identified specific people, employees that he wanted to target. And when he did that, he then had to create a recognizable, believable email that would allow him to send it to the target so that they would actually try to address that email. And in doing this, what he had to do was he had to know these people. He had to understand their position within inside the corporation, and both not only for the targeted individuals, but also from the person that was sending the email. Beth, remember that? She actually had sent it, or at least it looked like she sent that email. So we have to understand, how did that happen? Did Beth really send that by mistake, or is it someone that's spoofing her email? Now, again, we don't have that information within inside this particular presentation, but these are things that you need to consider. The other thing is, how did that email pass its spam filters? And again, having a well-formed from field and a to field generally does that. But there was also something embedded with inside of that email that was malicious. How did that get through? These are things that we have to understand and eventually mitigate. And then as he sends that, how did he know the senders? How did he join that information, get into that group? We have to understand how that was accomplished. Now, once he got there, he did have an attachment, and inside that attachment was the malicious software. And of course, once he submitted this and got this so that the receivers received the malicious file and then acted on that file, what happened? Was there a URL that was used? Was there a PDF that was used, a file that was used? How did he do that? What type of techniques may he have had to known to be able to do that? And then finally, once that file was acted on, what happened? What was the end game? What did the attacker want to gain? These are all the things you have to consider when you're doing your analysis. So this concludes the final example that I wanted to show you. And again, I wanted to give you some real life experience. And this is something that you may experience. You're going to be contacted. People are going to say, my system is acting really strange. And in doing that, you're going to have to understand what tools are provided for me that I can actually look at the problem. Is it a task manager, a way of actually monitoring processes? Is it the regedit facility where we can go in and look at registry entries? All of these tools we need to understand and know how to use, because this is what's going to help us gain the information that we need to identify what an attack is. So again, I hope you enjoyed this last example. What I wanted to do is I wanted to be able to walk you through a scenario where you can take all the things that you learned in the class and apply them and really come up with, hey, you know what, I really did learn a lot in this class because of what I've seen here and what I've gone through, and I feel more comfortable in this environment now.